Welcome, everyone. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 4 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. Pursuant to Standing Order 108 Sub 3, the committee is meeting in public on the report of the 45th General Election of April 28th, 2025. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to standing orders. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Before we continue, I would ask all in-person participants to consult the guidelines written on the cards on the table. These measures are in place to help prevent audio and feedback incidents, protect the health and safety of all participants, including interpreters. You also notice a QR code on the card, which links to a short awareness video. Just a quick reminder, though you all know, a reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. For members in the room, if you wish to speak, raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, but we have a witness for today. Before we get into the witness, I know we've spoken to everyone, and I believe if I seek it, I will find unanimous consent to amend the motion before us in the manner that was provided to the parties. Yes, agreed. So done, so moved, so carried. Thank you so much. I'd now like to welcome our witnesses for today's meeting, the Office of the Chief Electoral Officer, Monsieur Stéphane Perrault, the Chief Electoral Officer, and Monsieur Michel Roussel, Deputy Chief Electoral Officer, Electoral Events and Innovation. Monsieur Perrault will deliver his opening remarks. It's usually 5 minutes, but since you're here for 2 hours, I think I probably will have, or you will have latitude to go a little bit longer should those, should it require so. Monsieur Perrault.
So thank you. Merci, Monsieur le Président, de l'occasion de comparaître aujourd'hui.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the opportunity to speak with the committee today about the 45th general election. I would like at the outset to express my gratitude to the 343 returning officers and their teams, as well as the more than 230,000 Canadians who served their neighbours and allowed them to cast their vote. Going into this election, in addition to ensuring the transition to the new electoral map, which we did, obviously, Elections Canada focused its efforts on securing the electoral process and improving voting services. While we did have certain challenges, which I'll address over the next few minutes, the delivery of the 45th general election was an overall success. Since the previous election in 2021, there have been ongoing and important discussions about the election security and foreign interference. In the lead up to and during the election, we continue to work with our security partners to understand potential threats and to secure our IT systems and the overall electoral process. I can say today that Elections Canada did not experience any breaches to our IT infrastructure or interference with our electoral operations during the elections. The Hague Commission described disinformation as the single biggest threat to our democracy. To counter information manipulation, we developed a range of information products for voters, including a multimedia voter information campaign that is available in 50 languages, as well as detailed content on electoral integrity. We also monitored the information environment to observe inaccurate narratives about the electoral process both before and during the election. If we did observe an increase in inaccurate narratives, we were able to ensure that Canadians have access to correct information about the electoral process and to promptly correct misinformation through our various channels, such as our repository of official communications and our social media posts. In terms of improving voting services, we put in for this election the broadest range of services in any general elections. The Vote on Campus program was delivered for the first time outside a fixed date election context. Despite the fact that the timing of the election coincided with the end of the spring semester, around 76,000 electors voted at 109 service points in 96 post-secondary institutions. Early engagement with Indigenous communities before the election allowed Elections Canada to offer more flexible in-community voting services to those who wanted such devices, including in remote, isolated, and low-density communities. Overall, this engagement resulted in a 127% increase in early voting services and an 8% in election day services offered within communities. While we were able to better serve and collaborate with Indigenous communities overall, a lack of engagement on our part in Nunavik led to operational challenges, and some electors were unable to cast their ballot as a result. This is clearly unacceptable, and I asked for a fact-finding inquiry to determine exactly what went wrong so that we can address the shortfalls and make sure it does not happen again. The conclusions of the inquiry will be published a bit later this fall. I expect it to be in November. Our intention moving forward is to work with organizations and communities to better serve electors in Nunavik and all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities across the country.
Voted during the 45th general election, resulting in a voter turnout of 69%. This is the highest since 1993. Importantly, a record number of 88 million, or 44%, voted prior to Election Day. Of these, 7.5 million voted at advance polls and 1.2 million used a special ballot. In comparison, just 25 years ago, less than 7% of those who voted before Election Day. This ongoing trend shows a deep and lasting evolution in Canadians' voting behavior and service expectations. It also puts enormous pressure on our infrastructure and in particular on our returning officers. Any election is a major logistical undertaking and requires the coordinated efforts of an extraordinary number of people over an immense territory. It is done without any permanent infrastructure during a very short period and based on a calendar that is unknown ahead of time. In a snap election context with only 36 days, the ability of returning officers to secure polling sites, to recruit a sufficient number of poll workers, not just overall, but in each and every community, and to offer a range of special voting services may have reached its limit. In some cases, these pressures may have also contributed to some of the issues we experienced with special ballot voting in a few electoral districts that I mentioned in my report. We are currently reviewing special ballot training, control mechanisms, and processes to minimize the risk of errors, and we will implement changes in the coming months as we prepare for the next election. But it is important to also examine how we can adapt to the evolving needs and service expectations of Canadians, not just for the next election, but for future ones as well. As I indicated in my 2022 recommendations report, outside of a fixed date election context, a short 36-day campaign may not be sufficient to meet those evolving service needs. Increasing early voting services, whether by adding advanced polling days as was contemplated in the last Parliament, or simply increasing service points within the same 4 advanced polling days as we did in this election, requires more lead time. We've also been testing electronic lists of electors in by-elections and will continue to do so in order to modernize our processes and make them more efficient and flexible. But the introduction of technology at the polls to serve electors, even as we maintain our paper ballot, needs to be gradual and prudent. To conclude, Mr. Chair, Canada has a strong electoral process built on gradual change and adaptation. My report, as was the case with previous reports, is an opportunity to reflect on what adjustments are necessary to meet the evolving expectations of Canadians. Et ça va me faire plaisir de répondre aux questions des membres du comité.
I will be happy to answer the committee's questions.
Cooper for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Perot. Thank you, Mr. Roussel. Good to see both of you back in the committee. I'm going to ask Mr. Perot you some questions about the so-called longest ballot committee, which you reference in your report. In the last election, this group targeted the Carleton riding, although prior to the last election, they targeted several by-elections and then later targeted the Battle River Crowfoot riding in the recent by-election, with a total of 91 candidates in Carleton, a record 203 candidates in Battle River Crowfoot. Would you agree, broadly speaking, that the committee's tactic to flood the ballot with an endless list of candidates had a overall disruptive and negative impact on the electoral process in Carleton, in the prior by-elections, and in Battle River Crowfoot?
Certainly, it did have such an impact, and it was a challenge for a number of voters, especially those with disabilities, to be able to cast their ballot with such a long list of electors. And that is why, Mr. Chair, I've come to this committee in the past and recommended some changes to make sure that this can be addressed.
And just to sort of flesh out some of the challenges that this committee created, you referred to voters with disabilities. That would include voters with visual impairments, mobility issues, literacy challenges. Would that be correct?
Include as well voters with dexterity to handle such a large ballot. People who are physically impaired, who have limitations, would also face a challenge.
So it negatively impacted on voter autonomy.
That is that's what we find, yes.
And further to that, in the Carleton riding, it resulted in longer lineups at the polls?
It certainly resulted in longer lineups. Of course, much longer processes to count the ballots, as we're aware. We had to advance the count for 3 hours for the advanced polls count during that day, and the count extended throughout the night.
And in Battle River Crowfoot riding, it necessitated the adoption of an adapted ballot. And I presume that also created its challenges. Is that fair for certain voters?
Certainly, voters, for example, who would use the Braille list to cast a ballot would have a different experience. So yes, it does create challenges. Electors with low literacy or people who have difficulty writing, manipulating a pen or pencil, may find that to be challenging. I think from my perspective, one of the important point also is the fact that it requires me to set aside the rules that Parliament has passed for the format of the ballot. And that's something, of course, that I had to do to make sure the election could proceed. But as I said before this committee, it's not something that I do lightly. And that's why I hesitated before moving to a write-in ballot format, which is a greater variation from what is prescribed in the legislation.
Now, you mentioned that you had recommended some amendments to the Canada Elections Act. I know that in September 2024, following disruptions that occurred in by-elections, you wrote to the then Minister of Democratic Institutions, Dominic LeBlanc, to express your concerns about the impact of the longest ballot committee and proposed an amendment to the Canada Elections Act. Did you receive a response from the minister?
I'd just like to, Mr. Chair, to also mention that I shared, of course, that recommendation with the committee as well. It wasn't just to the minister. In terms of a commitment to make the changes, I did not receive a commitment to make that change.
Now, that recommendation was what? Just if you could elaborate on that.
So my recommendation was to ensure that the 100 signatures that are currently required, a bit less in some of the remote ridings, low-density ridings, that the 100 signatures be unique signatures. That a person, and I believe that is the philosophy of the legislation, though not the letter, that a person who endorses the nomination of a candidate endorses the nomination of that particular candidate and not just any candidate, whoever that candidate may be. And I believe that is the approach of the longest ballot committee signators, that they endorse anybody and everybody who wishes to be part of the long ballot initiative. So I don't think that's aligned with the spirit of the legislation. I also caution, however, that the requirement, should it be implemented, the requirement to have unique signatures should be something which may carry a fine, for example. Could be a few $100s, could be $1,000, but should not be caused to invalidate a nomination. As a candidate, the candidate would not know that a signature, a good faith candidate, would not know that somebody has signed on to somebody else's nomination paper. And the last thing that we would want is to have returning officers having to verify the 100 signatures to chase down, the potential double signatures, which may be in good faith. It may be somebody who was confused and wanted to be supportive, didn't understand the rules. But we don't want, certainly, a candidate nomination to be questioned just because one of the 100 names happened to be in somebody else's nomination paper as well. So my recommendation was that there be a prohibition for double signatures, a prohibition on inducing or encouraging people to do that, accompanied by sanctions. Again, it could be a fine, but without such a rule invalidating the nomination of any candidate.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, unless the candidate induced himself, or
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Mr. Lewis, for 6 minutes, please.
Great. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Monsieur Perrault, Monsieur Roussel, for being here. I appreciate it. Canadians want to thank you for the job you had protecting our elections. And at the same time, too, maybe people of Canada want to thank the 230,000 people who stepped up to serve their country for elections, including the 343 electoral officers who have that thankless job that if everything goes right, they are unnoticed, and if something goes wrong, they're on the front page. So I just want to take this time to thank you. Also for a very thorough report on the election and for your agreement to be here today, because this is an ongoing issue where we can always strive to be better, and you're getting challenges that are changing constantly. So what I wanted to touch base on was maintaining electoral integrity and addressing, you said disinformation. In your words, I believe you said disinformation was the biggest threat. And so what specific disinformation narratives did Elections Canada encounter during the election, and how do you address something like that in real time? In your words, you've got a month and change to address this. What are the challenges there, and what did you see as far as disinformation?
So there was a number of narratives, not necessarily surprising ones. We see similar narratives emerge in different jurisdictions, whether it's the UK, the US, and they tend to circulate in Australia, for example. So, for instance, a very common, probably one of the most dominant one in this election was the idea that pencils were provided so that votes could be erased. And, of course, that's not the reason why pencils are provided, and people can use a pen if they so wish. But that is something that is entirely predictable. And so these kinds of narratives, as we observe them around the world, we prepare and we provide. One of the resources was elective facts. So we had a list of common false narratives or incorrect narratives with correct information on them. So by preparing this in advance and by having a range of information on every aspect of the electoral process, we were ready to respond quickly to point people to the correct information.
Great. I was going to ask about electrofacts, but I'll tie that in. That was used to counter false claims. That disinformation, I'm assuming social media would be the way that it was spread the most. Is that something that you're monitoring as well, and then addressing that with electrofacts? And is that something that you're looking at in between elections to get on top of whatever trends might be happening elsewhere?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So we do monitor across between elections, across the electoral cycle, though not the same size of a team. But we in this election, for instance, we monitored in 22 languages, some 60 platforms. So it is quite extensive during election period. The number of languages and platforms reduces between elections. Obviously, Canadians are increasingly getting their information from social media, and that certainly contributes to the challenge of combating misinformation about the electoral process.
I think we're on the same page, because my next question dovetails off of that as well. We're a multicultural nation, and there are I believe you said about up to 60 digital platforms monitored and multiple languages. So what extra challenges, and how do you decide how to reach out through various channels in various languages? How are those decisions made?
So we have information products in different languages. As I mentioned, we have them in 50 languages, but we also provided media information packages. That's particularly important for diaspora communities who often have their own media or radio or channels, and we provide additional information to those media in the language of the diaspora community. So we did that in this election more than, I don't have the numbers with me, but certainly in Chinese and Mandarin, for example, we had more information available in those languages to circulate.
In election cycles, is that an ongoing conversation that you would have with these established networks?
Much less so. We did in the lead up to the election, for example, in Nunavut. Not in Nunavut, in Edmonton. We piloted a regional coordinator who did civic education for both students and adults, and we have a very large network of Inspire Democracy groups that receive our information and share it with their members, and that can happen at any time. It tends to be more active during the election period, but they certainly do that that across the electoral cycle, and we have a range of ethno-linguistic communities that receive information through the Inspired Democracy program. We have right now some 900 partner organizations.
Thank you. Last question. You talked about the Vote on Campus program, and this was the first time it was done in a non-fixed election. What additional outreach, education strategies are being considered to increase the percentages of youth, especially in post-secondary, to help them be more informed about voting? And can you report on how that program worked?
Brief answer, about 30 seconds.
Okay, the program was a challenge, not just because it was a fixed date, but in terms of uptake, because many students were away from campuses during the spring. In some cases, a small number who had committed to it said no, that their campuses were closed. But we work with student organizations both to recruit, but also to promote the activities and during the election period. And we work with student organizations ahead of the election to prepare for that.
Thank you so much. Madame Norbander, 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur
We have
Perrault.
6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Perrault and Mr. Roussel, for coming here today and to talk about improving things in the future. So we know that everything can be improved, and we'll be working with you to do that. I would ask a question about the special ballots. In your report, on page 22 and 23, 24, you talk about statistics for the 44th general election and the 45th. So I don't need to say more about it as an introduction. We see that there are percentages of votes returned that goes between 3 to 7%. So it's hard to say that there's a 100% report. There are always ballots that don't come to us or are late. So we can presume from one year to the next for different reasons. The ballots that aren't returned can vary. There can be variations. The good news is that to date we had a good improvement with the different types of special ballots used. Even from other countries and local, there were fewer ballots that weren't returned late and fewer that were not returned. So when somebody realizes that there's an error on the address on these ballots, can that official rest on a historical rate, or just on the fact that there are always ballots that aren't returned, to have a justification to not contact the voters to whom he sent these ballots through these alternate ways of voting? So, Mr. Chair, I'll have to ask your indulgence because we have a process that's in the courts talking about the situation in Terrebonne. It's not a bear trap, as we say, but I don't want to give comments. I think the court will be able to decide on this situation in Terrebonne, and after that it will be easier for me to speak about this. So I think I need to stop here. I understand your reservations, and I share them. But I'm asking more in a vision of future projections, so it might not be repeated, and to see whether we should eliminate some justifications that allowed us not to contact people who sent ballots after we saw that there were errors. Is there a justification that you can vote to not contacting voters and inviting them to vote in another way? So when an employee of the poll can see that there was an error and that prevented the voter from exercising the right to vote, we ask for that information to go up to the central administration. And sometimes you can have a local remedy or sometimes something else. There are people who correct errors. Sometimes there are bad instructions that are given, but when we know that, we can address the problem. So you can see in my report that I've mentioned this. It's not just something that's happened in Terrebonne. And about the information that's given to the election workers, are they given in a verbal way, principally, or do they have a document where there are instructions as to what to do when there's an error? So there are several challenges. We have to concentrate the information for the election workers, but there is documentation that's shared with the team at the local level, which asks them to raise the alarm and inform problems that don't allow voters to vote properly. So when an error has been observed, the way that one informs one's superiors, is that done verbally or by an informal email? Is there a way? How is the information passed up the chain of command when there's an error? Normally, it's often a situation of urgency when it's an election, so there are verbal reports, but there's also information to document problematic situations. We'll ask an incident report to be made to give all the details possible, but there's always a tension between dealing with the situation quickly and documenting. We try and find a balance between the two, but there are processes for this, and it's quite standardized. I don't know if you want to answer this. Yes, it's relatively standardized. We have a calling center that gathers and documents problems that are raised by returning officers, as Mr. Perrault explained. If ever we are discussing about major incidents that were noted, there's a standard form that's completed about the incident that's sent to Election Canada, which will allow investigation to be carried out.
Mr. Van Popta for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Perrault and Mr. Roussel, for being here with us. And thank you for a very thorough report on the 45th general election. Interesting reading. And it's an immense undertaking to have a general election in a fair and conclusive manner. But there were some challenges, which you highlight in the report. And I want to talk about one which hits close home to me in the riding of Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam, which is right across the river from my riding of Langley Township, Fraser Heights. So just to set the context, the special ballots that were cast in that riding by electors who did not live in that riding amounted to 822 ballots, and they were not counted.
Included in the official count, because so they will be reflected, except where there are issues with secrecy of the vote. They will be reflected alongside the official count.
Okay, so that's important to know. There were 7 electors in my riding. That wouldn't have made a difference, and your report does highlight that. You say the outcome would not have affected any of the 74 impacted districts, mine being one of them. That is true. There were 7 ballots that were cast by people living in my riding, and happily I won by more than 7 votes. So even if they had all gone the other way, I still would have won. But I want to tell those people your vote actually did count, because this is what I tell everybody. When I'm knocking on doors, they go, "Mr. Van Popta, you're going to win anyways. It doesn't matter if I vote." I go, "It matters a lot."
It matters.
Every vote counts.
Mr. Chair, apologies for interrupting. It matters. I wholeheartedly agree. And to all extent possible, we want to make sure that every valid vote is reflected, is counted. Now, if for some error that happens after validation, that we find out, it cannot be included in the official results. In the case of Coquitlam, a large number, a large percentage, I can't remember exactly, of the affected writings had done their validation when the issue arose. So that was not a possibility. It was nevertheless important to be very transparent about the situation because some of those writings were fairly close, not so close that it would have made a difference, but perhaps sufficiently so in the case of a recount. And it was critical that the candidates in those writings be made aware of the number of votes that potentially would have affected their election, and should they wish to do so, could have raised this in the context of a recount. So after validation, if we find out, we need to be very quick to be transparent to make sure that these rights can be properly exercised.
So what happens if the count, if this is discovered after validation? I just need to be clear on that. Would they be, and if the outcome would have been different? Yes. Would it have been a recount, or would you have invalidated the prior validation?
So that's a good question. I don't have, this is not something that we've encountered before. I would be very reluctant, but I won't rule it out, to undo a validation. I think that could be seen as circumventing the remedy in the Act for recounts. My preference would be to make the information available to the court in a recount so that the judge may take into account those votes. And leave the court process to determine that. There are several, guardrails and remedies in our system, and that's a good thing. Obviously, we don't like to see contested election, and so the recount or the validations are the ones that are the two opportunities to make sure that the right candidate has been elected.
I'm going to give you a hypothetical. I'm looking at the 74 writings, and they're written out in your report and alphabetically. I looked up Terrebonne just when Ms. Normandin was asking some questions, and it is not listed there. So nobody in Coquitlam voted in the Terrebonne election. But if it had been, what difference would that have made to a declaration in that Quebec riding?
Had that been the case, my hope is that the information being available could have been taken into account by the judge in the recount, so before going to a contested election.
What are you going to do to make sure this never happens again? And what actually did happen? Like a ballot box got lost. How can that possibly happen? So in the case of Coquitlam, we have a situation where there was confusion about the process. We have a team there that worked provincially and was confused with the different rules. Provincially in BC, the special ballots are sent to the headquarters after the election for the count. Federally, that's not the case. Now, this is something that ought to have been understood. It's very clear in our material, but we will, and we have begun to look at all the controls that can be implemented to make sure that these kinds of errors are picked up immediately and corrected before validation. So I've indicated publicly, Mr. Chair, that we will be introducing changes to our processes.
30 seconds over, but it was an excellent question, and used my prerogative. I would have wanted to hear the answer. So thank you. Mr. Maloney for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for coming today. And thank you for all the work you do. You guys have a tough job. There's no doubt about that. A couple of questions. I want to go back to this so-called longest ballot issue. I think we can all agree that it's outrageous. I mean, if we're being frank with each other, this thing, if it had a purpose, I'm not sure anybody understands what it is anymore. So in my personal opinion, we need to find a way to stop it. This is not a partisan issue. It's an issue that impacts all the parties in different ways at different times. I mean, it was an issue in Battle River Crowfoot. It was a battle in Mr. Poilievre's previous riding, the one he lost. The name escapes me at the moment. But it was also an issue in previous by-elections where Liberals won the race. So it affects us all equally. Look, in Battle River Crowfoot, one of the candidates, I believe, was from my riding. I don't know that she's ever been there. I'm not even sure she can find it on a map, frankly. So we need to stop this. So my question is, what steps can be taken to do it? For example, to register as a candidate, you have to submit your papers. You have to go through some sort of interview process, but you don't have to do it in person. I know of circumstances where the person who was responsible for doing interviews spoke to somebody on Zoom or Teams. The person wasn't in the city. The person wasn't in the province. I'm not even sure they were in the country. They were on a boat. I understand, this helps. It helped particularly during COVID in certain circumstances, but is there any thought being given to requiring in-person attendance for people when they're going through this process to conduct the interview when they submit their papers?
Thank you for the question. I would be reluctant to require an in-person presence. We have very, very large electoral districts in Canada, probably some of the largest, if not the largest, in the world. Nunavut, to take an example, is almost 2 million square miles and very limited communications across the riding. That creates a range of challenges, of course, for candidates and elected MPs. But in large districts, to require the presence at the office of the returning officers, even where we have satellite offices, may present challenges for some of the candidates. So that's not something that I have considered, just to be clear.
Okay. I understand that geography is a significant hurdle in Canada, but there has to be some way to curtail the abuse from that perspective. I don't know. Ask them to name 3 streets in the riding or name 2 restaurants. There's got to be something to prevent this absurd situation, which takes me to my next point about the signatures. There's been some discussion about this today. You're required to get 100 signatures. I'm not sure that preventing somebody from signing two candidates' forms is necessary. That might be a bit too strict, but there has to be a way to curtail it. I don't think the signatures are required to be submitted in original form. It can be done electronically, if I'm not mistaken. If you could confirm that. And the second question is, what processes are used or what steps are taken to validate the signatures? Does anybody ever do any follow-up and go knock on the door and say, "Hi, Mr. Maloney, your name appears on this form. Was it you that signed it, or was it some member of your family," etc.?
First question, Mr. Chair. Signature documents can be scanned and uploaded electronically, submitted through our portal. With respect to the second question, the answer is no. We don't go, for example, door to door. Our returning officers are not experts at comparing signatures, and very often nomination papers are filed at the last hour, if not the last minute. So for the returning officer who's got 40 hours to confirm, and usually likes to inform the candidate if there's a problem with one of the signatures, if there's a missing signature, then they have to move very, very quickly to make sure that these are names of people who are in the electoral districts, and that's the verification process that takes place. Obviously, there may be situations where it's apparent that it's the same signature across the board, and if it's so apparent, that would be flagged. But that is not the same thing as truly having a signature verification process for the nominations.
So when these are uploaded...
Sorry, Mr. Maloney, you did have 2 seconds left, and I've now used them, so I apologize. The good news is we will have lots of time to come back and ask more questions. Madame Normandin, 2.5 minutes, please.
So I want to talk about special ballots again. The fact that there were errors on the envelopes to return the ballots, if we don't contact people to inform them, is there a risk that their vote not be counted, in your opinion? It might endanger the returning of the ballot. So, about not contacting people to inform them of the error, can we just think, well, we have a guarantee that the ballots will end up coming back. They'll go to the post office will correct the postal code, and it will come in time for 9 p.m. on the election day. Does that guarantee exist? There is no guarantee, I have to be honest. Even if the envelope is addressed properly, sometimes the ballots don't get back to us, and it's not an error on our part. The special vote bulletin is a process that allows us to reach electors that would be unable to vote otherwise. So these problems that are raised should not serve to set the system aside, but lead us to thinking about how to improve the process. But it's certain that the simplest way to vote is to go to a polling office, either in early voting or after. There are fewer links in the chain, and there are fewer risks that ballots would be lost. Thank you. So I have a question on the polls that couldn't open in Nunavik. So in the report, it said that the conclusions will be made public once the investigation has been finished. Are we near the end of this review? Yes, it's over. We're just drafting the report. We want the report to be published in French, English, and Inuktitut. It's important for me that people who speak that language in the community receive the report. And I said that I expected that it be done in November.
Yes. Jackson.
Thank you, Chair, and very nice to meet both of you. My pleasure and a privilege to be here as a new Member of Parliament under the 45th General Election. So thank you for making sure that went smoothly, and my local returning officer, Joni Swidnicki, is a wonderful person. She did a great job in Brandon Souris. So wasn't originally going to start here, but I am just curious because you mentioned it about the pencil issue. So would it be beneficial, I guess, to just go back to Elections Canada providing pens at voting booths in order to deal with this misinformation issue that was out there? Or is that something that you would consider going forward, is going back to pens?
It's something that so to be clear, I don't believe we ever did use pens at polling stations. We've all used, as far as I know, always used pencils. The benefit of pencils, beyond the fact that they are economical, is that they don't dry up. And they don't smudge. So if you start using ball pens, for example, and you stored them for 4 years and the leftovers stay on for some pencils have been in our boxes for several cycles. They're always working. If you buy pens, you have to verify that they work. And even if they do work, sometimes they may smudge, and that could cause ballots to be rejected. So our preference is for pencils, but we do not disallow the use of pens.
Thank you for that. Just trying to deal with this misinformation issue. There may be an additional cost, but on the information side and dealing with credibility questions about ballot, perhaps that is worth the cost. But when you talk about smudging, for example, I understand that is an issue on the physical ballot itself. But I would like to try, as parliamentarians, I think we all would, to try and combat some of those issues, again, in a nonpartisan fashion if we can. So if there's anything we can do, please let us know. In terms of the report, it was very comprehensive. I agree with my colleagues' comments on that. It states that more than 60% of voter information cards were either mailed late or not at all. And I understand with labor disruptions and the general context of mail delivery these days, I'm skeptical that is likely to improve going forward. So in terms of the voter information cards themselves, if 60% can't be delivered on time, have they outlived their usefulness? Or what does Elections Canada recommend? Would you consider other types of delivery providers to ensure that 60% figure not getting delivered on time is very high, in my opinion? Have you considered other options to get those cards on time, or are they past their usefulness?
So thank you. That's a very rich question. I'll try to peel the different parts of the onion. Just to be clear, 60% were mailed late. That's after day 24, which the Act provides that they should be in the mail at day 24. I believe it's something like 17%. It's a much lower figure that arrived late, and for me, late is after advance polls have begun. So, of course, we want that to happen before advance polls, but it's critical that they be received before polling day. So that's the first point. The second point, Mr. Chair, is that it's not primarily a mail delivery problem. In this election, the challenge that we faced was the inability, not of finding, but confirming polling locations. In many cases, what we see is that it takes a lot more time to negotiate leases, whether it's school principals, school boards, commercial landlords, with lawyers and boards that they report to, having to validate and approve the leases in a way that was not the case before. So it's no longer a handshake or a phone call and a quick signature. It's a long process. And then the returning officer moves to Plan B, and Plan B is the same long process, and Plan C is the same long process. So the challenge, the main challenge, is securing polling locations in a timely way, and that's why I said that the calendar in a fixed date is not a problem, but outside of a fixed date, that really creates an important pain point.
Okay, thank you. Just a quick question, because I know I'm running out of time in this round, about my constituency. I heard a lot, and again, I'm a new candidate, about a couple of locations, Hobbs Manor in Brandon, which is a seniors residence, and La Riviere and Cypress River, two communities that have had polling stations in them for time immemorial. Nobody can remember an election where they didn't have a federal polling station. All of those places did not have one this time. So it has the population threshold to have a polling location changed as part of this election? Or why would these long-standing communities that have always had a polling location not have had one? It, particularly in the two rural towns, it severely impacted because there is no public transit available in these communities to get to the next community over for residents to be able to vote, etc. So it was a significant barrier for all of those locations.
And I do appreciate that. We did not raise the threshold in any way for locations for assigning polls. We had more polls in this election than in previous elections. The ability to find one that is suitable in the right location is where the challenge is. So it's not about Elections Canada wanting to reduce the number of polls, quite the contrary. For me, especially for polling day, the last chance to vote, proximity voting has always been top of mind and is critical, and that's one thing that we strive to achieve. If I may, Mr.
We have 2 hours. Yes, I will.
On your initial question, we are looking at options. So voters can go online at any time and find their polling location. Of course, once it's confirmed, they don't need to wait for their voter information card. We would like to allow electors to download their voter information card in digital format. Now, that would not replace the paper one, because for some electors, that's just not an option. Right. But I do believe that over time, the paper voter information card may go away. But that's not for the immediate future. I think we need to have multiple layers as we move forward.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. O'Rourke.
Thank you, Chair Biddle. Having twice been a trainer for Elections Canada and once for Elections Ontario, I just want to thank everyone who worked the elections, and it's important for people to know that within a matter of days, the returning officers have to find the locations, they have to start accepting ballots at their location, they have to hire hundreds of people and train them. Effectively, there are a number of manuals. I know I've gone through them myself, memorized them, and been a troubleshooter on election day. So it is a monumental task to pull together an election sort of out of thin air. And I want to thank you for your leadership, all our returning officers, and all of the folks who were the poll workers. Just out of curiosity, we know the advance poll this time was held on Easter weekend. Many of the faith communities that might hold polling stations did not this time. So was it situational that there was a challenge to secure enough voting locations, or is this an ongoing challenge? And also, did the new boundaries impact that at all? I know in my riding of Guelph, which is the home of the robocall, you may recall, there was some confusion around the new boundaries, and people who had always sort of crossed the street to go and vote could no longer do that. So were those factors at all?
Broadly speaking, I would think not. Certainly, returning officers had to adjust to new boundaries, especially experienced returning officers who had contacts established in the past with certain locations. That was an adjustment. In Ontario, or in particular, because we used to share the boundaries with provincial boundaries, and we do share some of the returning officers, they had to, because we had back-to-back elections, they had to move from one boundary to another and make adjustments. So there were challenges there. But speaking to the CEO of Ontario, he had a huge challenge confirming polling sites. And he didn't change his writings. And so I don't think it's unique circumstance. I think we have to accept that the difficulty stems from a range of legal and social factors. I think today, school principals, if they have a badminton tournament organized in a school, will not cancel it without consulting the parents, going to the council. They're reluctant to do that. Commercial landlords have lawyers, and they often own many properties, and they have standard processes, and these standard processes are not designed for turnaround times as we need them during an election. So I think it's an evolution of the market and how the real estate market for polls.
Je vous poserai une question rapidement aussi au niveau des bulletins de vote qui sont très longs avec multiples candidats.
Was it considered to require having a different official for each of these candidates? That was suggested on several occasions. I'm not against it. I don't know if it's really a solution to the problems that we experienced. I don't think that it would be unwise to think that there's an official agent who is working with only one candidate. The candidates are competing with each other, and it would be a bit curious to have teams sharing the same official officers in the same riding when they're supposed to be competitors. So I think that as a principle, I'd be open to that. But I think that if we want to deal with the issues that we experience, we have to look at the double signature issue.
May attempt to meddle in democratic elections and undermine them. And one of the ways that is increasingly happening is through deep fakes or artificial intelligence. And so can you tell us why these threats need to be taken seriously? Should AI content made by or on behalf of political entities be labeled? And how do you think the Elections Act can be used as a tool to fight against malicious uses of artificial intelligence in our elections?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I have made recommendations on that specific topic before the election in the context of the Hogg Commission. I do believe that there are adjustments that are warranted in the Elections Act. For example, the impersonation rules contemplate a situation where someone presents herself or himself as somebody else, but not where they present somebody else in a different context or saying or doing things that they haven't done. So there are adjustments that are required to deal with that. I do believe labeling of all synthetic content would provide greater transparency as well, and that's also a recommendation that I had. We have not experienced, thankfully, significant amounts of disinformation using AI in this election. My understanding is that it may have been used more to promote content than to manipulate it. But we did see, for example, a fake Journal de Montréal article saying that for those over 60, Elections Canada's moved polling day on the Tuesday. And that wasn't AI, but it was made to look like, or it may have been, but it was made to, you don't need AI to do that. But thankfully, social media platforms were very, very quick to respond and to pull that content down. And so I don't believe it had any impact whatsoever.
We've completed 2 rounds of questioning, so I'm going to suspend for a few minutes. Much more, but we'll turn it over to Mr. Cram for 5 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for joining us today, and especially thank you for your very detailed report on the 45th general election. I think that election night is a very exciting and stressful time for candidates and Canadians alike. I'm sure everyone in this room was on the Elections Canada website on the evening of April 28th, and Unfortunately, when we needed it most, elections.ca crashed. According to page 18 of the report, it went down at 7 p.m. on election night and was not fully restored until just after 5 a.m. the next morning. And I strongly suspect even the most hardcore political junkies were fast asleep by 5 a.m. and there was probably a very large reduction in volume and traffic at the website by that late hour. So I was wondering if the witnesses could share with the committee what exactly went wrong with the website and what steps are being taken to make sure that doesn't happen again. And I hope that the technical solution is not to just wait until 5 o'clock in the morning when people stop using the website.
So thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. Many elements to that question. To be clear, it's not technically speaking, the website was not the problem. The web service provider that's behind the website, so our systems were functioning, but people could not access them. So there was a failure of a firewall that is set up by a private partner that provides the web services for us during the election, and that firewall could not handle the spike that we saw on election night. We did see throughout the election period, I should say, we saw double the visits on our website, and that was true as well on election night, more than double what we had in the last two elections, which were pretty stable. So that created a firewall to go into what we call protection mode. And to stop the traffic from penetrating or slow it down significantly such that it was very difficult for most Canadians to get access. A couple of things. One is that at that point, we had to identify the source of the problem. We were very quickly informed, working with Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, that it was not a cyber attack. So this was almost instantaneous. We knew that that was not the case. Our service provider, however, was not able to identify in real time the source of the problem. So there's a few lessons learned from that event. Of course, from the service provider point of view, they have augmented significantly the capacity of their firewalls. They've replaced the firewalls with much greater capacity and doubled them. We've also introduced protocols where we will be monitoring more actively their pre-election tests rather than let the commercial partner do their tests. We will want to be more involved in seeing the tests that take place. So they're very committed to that. We did have a fail-safe, a couple of fail-safe solutions. One is that there's a separate channel that provides the results to the media consortium. So the results kept flowing through the media consortium to the media, and that's through a different channel. And that's an important safety that we will, of course, maintain. And we had an alternative replication of our website across the world in thousands of servers, except that replication, two things. One is that it's a static website. We're looking into that. It provides information, but not live information. And we, in hindsight, took too long to switch to that static website. We should have switched sooner. So we're drawing lessons from that event and making sure it does not happen again.
This segues well into my next question about the live results were still being distributed to the media. When I was declared the winner on election night, I did a screen print of the results and posted it to social media and said thank you to all the voters. When I checked the results the next morning, I was down 1,300 votes from the results posted on election night. And there was something that, now, fortunately, my opponent was down by about the same amount, but we saw this in Terrebonne and in other ridings where the results changed from one day to the next. I was wondering if you could explain how it's possible to lose 1,300 votes from election night to the morning of the next day, and why there are these discrepancies in the results being reported to the mainstream media.
I'll have to, Mr. Chair, look into that question more deeply in terms of losing votes, because that would be surprising. What is not surprising is that election night results do vary between election night and validation. That's why there's a validation. In fact, if you look at the election site, Elections Act, preliminary results do not exist in the law. That's something that we, of course, provide as a matter of tradition, and Canadians and candidates very much want it. But it has to be clear that on election night, with poll workers calling in results being hand entered into systems, there are late at night fatigue that comes into play and human error. And that's why the validation process is so important. And there's always some variation between election night results and the validation. So that is not unusual. We also sometimes see important swings in the vote simply because, for example, if a group of advanced poll results come in late at night and they're in a part of the district that tends to favor one candidate, you can see a swing happening, and that sometimes people are concerned about that, but that's not unusual. But we will look into your situation, certainly, and we can talk about that.
Mr. Al-Sad. 5 minutes.
Chair. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Perrault and Mr. Roussel, for taking the time to be here with us today. I say this with confidence that it means a lot to the members of this committee and to the millions who are watching us on CPAC right now, of course. Madame Normandin l'a dit parfaitement, il y a toujours une possibilité de mieux
Ms.
faire.
Normandin said it perfectly. There's always possibility to do better, and I am sure we all agree about this. I represent the community of Mississauga Centre, and they were very clear on their priorities in the last elections. They're very clear about it every day. They continue to be so. I'm also a member of the Heritage Committee, and I would like to take the opportunity to ask a few questions about mis- and disinformation.
And ensuring Elections Canada can address misinformation rather quickly. Could you speak to that as well, please?
Yes, I think one of the successes of this election from our perspective is having prepared so much information products and made them available to the media so that they could use it. And we really did see that. I don't have numbers here to share with the committee, but I was impressed in the early phases of the election how the media would actually actively use the products that we made available to them. And I had a sense that this was really working well. And many Canadians listen to local radio or ethnic newspapers, and so yes, there's a growing trend towards social media, but I think it's critical that we maintain the channels through other more traditional mediums to reach different communities.
I also understand that there are special protections in place during election periods against misleading publications, undue foreign influence, and broadcasting outside of Canada. Could you explain what these are and whether you think these protections need to apply outside of specific election periods as well?
I have to refresh my memory here, Mr. Chair, but there's a range of provisions, of course, regarding the undue influence of foreigners that have been enacted that speak to the use of funds to facilitate, to support the vote for a candidate or party or opposed a candidate or a party by a foreign entity. And these provisions right now apply only during the election period. So that's something that in my report that I mentioned earlier that I made last fall, I did suggest that it be expanded outside of the election period.
Thank you so much. Ms. O'Rourke very kindly made questions and queries about AI broadly. I'm quite interested in AI and deepfakes, specifically in relation to foreign interference. Could you speak to what we do in order to disrupt these kinds of attempts?
That's a challenging question. I think transparency is the greatest tool that we have, and in my case, we are looking at specifically, this or misinformation about the electoral process. But of course, the integrity of the overall electoral process also needs to consider deep fakes regarding candidates and parties and so forth. And so that's why I think the law needs to be re-examined with that in light. It's an evolving threat. There was concern raised by the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity ahead of the election. They are playing catch up as everybody else regarding the ability to detect and to identify synthetic content that may be misleading. I think platforms have an important role to play as well in making sure that they filter out synthetic content. They are the technical experts, and I believe that they have a responsibility vis-a-vis that kind of content, especially in an election period.
Fantastic. My final question is on the recent election we saw, the by-election we saw in Battle River Crowfoot. The ballots were 97 centimeters long, 30.5 centimeters wide. Could you speak to the choice of having voters write in their names and what kind of impact these had on increasing kind of the resources the Elections Canada had to allocate towards that election?
So in Carleton, where we had the long ballot with 97 candidates, we did have to send in people from headquarters. We believe around 40 staff members were sent in to facilitate the count and throughout the election period to support the returning officer at nomination, for example. And so there was extensive hand-holding to support the work there. That's not something that we could have done as well at a distance in Battle River Crowfoot. The numbers were immensely superior, not 93, but 214, if I remember correctly, names on the ballot. So we had to shift and take a different approach. So we did have the write-in ballot. We did have staff on site to support the returning officer, especially for the nomination, confirmation of nominations. Overall, in hindsight, I think it worked well. But as I said, it's not something that I would want to do regularly.
Madame Normandin, you were excellent the last time, and your questions were exactly 2.5 minutes, but I haven't been keeping very many people close to that, so if it goes over, don't be too strict on the 2.5 minutes.
Merci pour votre...
I've let
Say a word.
There were some eyebrows.
Merci pour la latitude.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, but sometimes I don't have time to ask a question, so I say I will count on your generosity of the time. After that, I want to come back to Nunavik. I know the report has not been made public, but I would like maybe to find out a few things about this. We understand that among the issues that prevented the opening of some polling stations, there were weather factors that was noted by the media. We also know that there was a situation where election workers had to come by plane, and they were aware once they got there that there was material that was missing so that for the polling station to function. I'd like to hear what you say, the balance between what's unpredictable, but also the need to communicate what's happening clearly, because it seems strange that the election workers come on site and then they observe that the material wasn't sent without having been warned ahead of time. So I'd like to have a general comment on the communications aspect to solve problems in remote regions where there are many challenges, and there are weather challenges and distant challenges that you don't have in large centers. So I'll answer a bit more broadly to your question. The question of weather, well, especially in regions like Nunavik, we have to expect storms. That's something that happens. So the idea of sending in election workers at the last minute for the vote, that's a risky proposition. We have a functioning model in Canada that it's the neighbor serving their neighbors. So that's true everywhere in urban centers, but even more true in remote regions. It's essential that there be local resources in place to support voter services. There can be cases where that doesn't work. We weren't able to hire people, and we have to send in workers by plane, but that must be a last recourse. So that's the first thing, first lesson. The fact of having people on site help us understand what's happening locally. It's very hard when we don't have anyone in the place to get accurate information on what's happening the morning of the elections. So there are a lot of things that are caused by the fact that we don't have local people in place. There have to be local affairs officers, and that has to be done before the elections. They can help with recruitment difficulties. If we don't do that, the risks are before the elections. They can help with recruitment difficulties. If we don't do that, the risks are greater.
Please. Oh, sorry, Mr. Cooper. My apologies. Then, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to follow up on Mr. Maloney's questions with respect to verifying the validity of signatures for nomination papers of candidates. Just so that I'm clear, is it the case that at present there is no verification done by Elections Canada, that when signatures are presented on the forms that they're taken at face value?
Just to be clear, there is no counter information. We don't have on record the signatures of all Canadians to make that comparison, nor would the returning officers have the expertise. Signatures can change. So the very concept of verifying each and every signature to make sure that they're authentic is one that is incompatible with the nature of the process.
Well, so they're taken at face value.
There's a verification that these electors reside in the electoral district and that the numbers are correct. If there are allegations of fraudulent behavior, then that can be addressed in the context of an investigation. That takes a lot more time.
So why not verify or audit signatures? I mean, there was evidence, for example, in the case of the longest ballot committee, that there were organizers going around with nomination forms, and at the top where it said name of candidate, it was blank. Now, not anyone can go out and collect signatures. You actually have to be authorized by someone running to do that. So what would be difficult for Elections Canada to simply undertake some kind of audit, not necessarily going through each and every person who signed, but picking up the phone or knocking on the door or communicating in some way to verify that, in fact, the individual who appears to have signed the paper did sign the paper, and that they did sign it understanding that they were endorsing a specific individual whose name they wished would appear on the ballot.
There are just a couple of points to answer, hopefully, your question. On the issue of blank names at the top, the name of the candidate has to be ascertained, or the potential prospective candidate. There cannot be a blank check, and we have refused in past election. The initial iterations of that initiative involved having a blank check, basically people signing on without an identified candidate. That is not acceptable. Okay, so it has to be a known candidate identified to the person who signs to support the nomination of that candidate. The issue of verification, as I said, we do not have on record signatures of Canadians, so there's nothing to compare to. It would really require an investigation to find out if these are false signatures. That is not something that we would do lightly. I don't think there's any suspicion that there was fraudulent conduct in those long ballot initiatives. We have no information that people forged signatures. If there was such information that was basically credible information or suspicion, we would refer that to the commissioner.
It's not necessarily forged signatures, but if you present someone 10 different papers and ask them to sign 10 different times, and then after the fact, the name of a candidate appears at the top of that form, and the form is altered after the signatures have been collected, then that raises questions, is it not, about the validity of that candidate and whether there was compliance with the Canada Elections Act?
It certainly does, but I'm not aware of any evidence to that effect.
Well, perhaps you should be, and perhaps that evidence will be presented if you haven't seen it. But I guess it just underscores the fact that I guess it speaks to the fact that what is so difficult about Elections Canada calling or taking some sort of mechanism, some sort of process to verify when you have these types of situations, whether they existed in the longest ballot committee or in other circumstances, that could quite easily be detected. It wouldn't take very long to realize that this had been going on. And wouldn't it also serve as a deterrent if there was some knowledge or awareness that Elections Canada was actually verifying that the act was being complied with?
So again, I have no information that would suggest there was unlawful conduct taking place, either by the leaders or organizers of the longest ballot campaign or by the voters who signed.
That's immaterial. That's immaterial. I asked.
If I may,
I asked about.
Mr. Cooper, your overtime, if we can, again, given the amount of time we have, Mr. Perreault, finish answering your question, and then we'll move on.
Left alone. Until we have reasons to suspect their behavior, we shouldn't bother them with questions that put into question the authenticity of their behavior. There needs to be something to start with.
Thank you so much. Ms. Idlow, please. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the committee for including me in this important study. Mr. Perreault, I've appreciated all your responses and all the work that you've done to make sure that my constituents have an opportunity to vote, such an important right. I'm going to be asking you about 4 or 5 questions related to different phases of the election. So I'll be kind of ping-ponging, just so you know. My first question to you is regarding the voter information cards. In your report, you stated that you had to use Section 17(1) of the Elections Act to allow recognition of individuals who wanted to vote. I'm wondering if you foresee the need to change that section given this Liberal government's position on Canada Post and the labor dispute, how that might impact voter information cards from being mailed in a timely manner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Idlow, for the question. As I said earlier, we are exploring various delivery channels for voter information cards. The issue of connectivity in Nunavut can be a challenge, I'm aware, in some places, and whether downloading a card is something that would be available to some of your electors is a question that we certainly have to look into. But it is a challenge. And in this case, again, in the case of Nunavut, there were challenges with confirming locations, which delayed the sending of the VIG. That has nothing to do with Canada Post. And there are challenges that are, I would say, inherent to the delivery of postal postal parcels or mail in such a large region where, of course, weather incidents can happen and delay the vote. So I think there's a mix of factors, and we can expect those factors to happen again in future elections. And that's why there has to be a range of mechanisms to inform electors of the voting locations and the times to vote, not just rely exclusively on the voter information card.
Thank you so much. I know that you, more than most, will understand the challenges that I experience as the MP for Nunavut, with Nunavut being such a huge territory, with all 25 communities being fly-in communities. Specifically, I do want to ask about the northernmost community, Grise Fjord. As you'll recall, did not get to open their polls until about 2 o'clock. I wonder if you could describe very quickly the circumstances that led to the challenges of voters in Grise Fjord being able to vote on that day.
Very quickly, I think very few Canadians appreciate the challenges that you face and that our returning officer faces in Nunavut, the immensity of the territory. I believe that in Grise Fjord, the issue was with the late delivery due to weather situation, late delivery of the material. That must include the list of electors with the struck names. So that is something that cannot be delivered many days ahead of polling day. That's something that comes in fairly late in the days leading to polling day. And if there's an important delay, then it can reduce the number of hours at the vote. And I believe that's what happened in Grisfjord. Monsieur Hussein?
It is indeed.
Okay, thank you so much. I wonder what the legislative restraints are from ensuring that those kinds of physical restrictions are avoided, so that there are creative ways of ensuring that, for example, we'll have known by election day who the candidates would be and how they ensure that they can practice their right to vote with possibly knowing that weather delays or mechanical delays will always happen no matter what time of year elections are happening.
I wish I had a good answer for you. I don't have a perfect answer. As I said earlier, I think the delivery of materials, generally speaking, is something that can and must be arranged ahead of time. It requires people on the ground working from the communities, and that is sometimes a challenge. I'll be honest. Recruitment in some parts of Canada, including Nunavut, can be difficult. But having people on the ground and being able to send the material ahead of time is critical. As I said, the one item that cannot be sent so much in advance is the final list of electors where the names from the advance polls is struck. So until we have live lists, and there are limitations to that probably in Nunavut, until we have live electronic lists, I'm not sure what the answer to that is, but it certainly is something that I will be considering.
Thank you
so much.
Oh, thank you so much. Just canvassing with the committee, it's 12:32. I propose, and happy to hear thoughts. We've gone through 3 full rounds, that we go through a 4th and call it a meeting. That's fine. Excellent. Okay.
If I may, I do have some more questions if the committee doesn't mind.
We will sort through that. I will canvass with the committee members while we continue along with the questions. I believe it's Mr. Jackson. Well, it's up to you, Mr. I have Mr. Jackson and then Mr. Van Popta as the second conservative in the round. If you'd like to flip that, that's entirely up to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try to keep these very brief. There were 57,440 ballots cast by electors living outside of Canada voting by mail, according to your report. That is a significant increase from the 27,035 cast in the 44th general election. Just wondering if you would be willing to submit to the committee a breakdown of which electoral districts these ballots were counted in.
Certainly, that's something that I can commit to providing after, of course, this session. Yes.
Wonderful. All 3 measures of accuracy for the list of electors, coverage, currency, and accuracy, were lower for this election than the previous general election, and in fact, I think they were lower than the election before that as well. So accuracy is trending down in these 3 categories since 2019. What are the causes of that, and do you think that's acceptable to deliver a secure and fair election, or what are you doing to address those indicators trending downward?
So I certainly agree that the quality of a list is critical to the quality of the election, both in terms of making it accessible and the integrity of the process. So that's something that's important. Right now we have a coverage, or at the election we had the coverage of 95.2%. That is very slightly lower than in the past elections, very comparable, and an accuracy of 92.2, again slightly lower. If you compare that to 2019, which is a fixed date election, it was slightly higher, just over 96 coverage. because of the fact that we have the ability in a fixed day to do information campaigns ahead of the election and to promote people going on to the register ahead of time and either adding themselves or moving themselves if they have moved. So it is not at all surprising that you would see a difference between fixed date elections and non-fixed date elections. The numbers that we have here are comparable and historically on the high end of accuracy and coverage for the National Register of Electors.
Thank you. And just to follow up on that, so comparing the numbers from 2021 to this election, to non-fixed date elections, but still less this time around than in 2021?
Yes, in 2021 we may have carried over a bit of the benefits. The difference between 21 and 25 are marginal. They're more significant between fixed date 19 and 25. So it's likely, I would speculate, that we carried over some of the benefits of the 2019 election into 2021. Whereas we have a longer time period here between the two elections, between 21 and 25, and so there's a bit of a degradation, a slight degradation of the coverage and accuracy.
And if I may, the safety net during the election is the revision. Any elector can go on our website, they call the office of the returning officers and get the record updated if needs be. So we had 1.3 million electors at the last election who did so, and which is in line a little more than we had in the 44th GE, to your point. But is way less than the 2.8 millions that we saw at the inception of the National Register of Electors 20 years ago. So the long arc of history, if I may say, goes in the right direction with respect to the coverage, currency, and accuracy of the National Register of Electors.
Thank you. And just my final question, your report talks about disinformation, as you mentioned, particularly on social media elsewhere, and the setup of a web page in many different languages that talks about what interference in elections, what pressure would look like, that type of thing. I'm just wondering how much activity did that section of your website get during this election, of voters coming forward and saying, I think I might have been influenced, I feel, this type of thing? And what does the process look like when you, as Elections Canada, get reports where people are concerned about activity that pressuring, that's taking place, pressuring people in elections? And where do you take that information? What does the process look like to ensure that those potential threats to a voter or voters are taken seriously and addressed?
So thank you. Just to be clear, the multimedia campaign in 50 languages is not really about, it is about information. It's about the basic information about the electoral process. It's not. It helps to fight disinformation, but it's different than the information on our website. We have, for example, Electofacts, which I mentioned earlier, which is specifically to correct mis- or disinformation. So there are different tools that we have in place to promote correct information. As I said, we have a social media monitoring team, and when we see incorrect information, we have pre-approved responses that are prepared, that are ready to go, and that we can use our social media platforms to communicate directly to those voters on those platforms. When something new arises that is not captured by our pre-existing message, then there's an escalation process and a decision is made. In some cases, you have to decide whether an intervention would provide greater attention to someone who's posting than not, and measure the quality or the risk to the process that the misinformation carries. So there's a judgment as to when we intervene and with what kind of information. We always want to be factual, never provide opinion. We never say, for example, this is why you can trust election. We say, here are the safeguards. And so we let people make up their mind. So there's judgment as to what kind of language we use. But there's a process in place with a team to escalate if it's new, not pre-approved messages.
Thank you so much. Mr. Maloney for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. And you owe me 2 seconds from the last round. So I'm going to The question about local returning officers. My understanding is that the Canada Elections Act requires that the names and addresses of the returning officers are required to be published in the Gazette, which I think creates a privacy concern, a safety concern, and connected to that, going back to the longest ballot issue, recognizing that most of these people who put their name on the ballot are there to create mischief, that gives them access to the voters list. What protections or safeguards are in place to make sure that those people are not using the voters list, for example, to finding my address in my home, so that they can put a protest group together and come and disturb my neighbors or any other thing that they may be up to? Because I think once you recognize they're not there for legitimate purposes, I think you then have to build in extra safeguards to protect against it.
So, Mr. Chair, 2 points. First, on the safety point, I agree with that. That is something that I have recommended, that the address of returning officers not be published. That, I don't believe, serves a compelling purpose, and there are concerns that have been expressed by returning officers about their safety. We've seen that in other jurisdictions in the U.S., for example, and that was something that I believe was included in Bill C-65 in the last Parliament, and hopefully it could be revived. Access to the preliminary list is not open to unconfirmed candidates. It is open to the parties who ran candidates in the last election. I did make recommendation that it be restricted to the ridings where the party ran a candidate, or once they have a candidate in this election, of course, that they have access to that. But independent candidates, as we have in the longest ballot committee, do not receive the list of electors until they're confirmed.
That's good to know. Thank you. Okay, so I want to follow up on the point Mr. Cooper and I were both making earlier about the signature issue. Do you speak to your counterparts provincially? And in my case, I'm interested to know whether you've spoken to the chief returning officer in the province of Ontario to determine whether they have done any audits or they have any mechanism or process in place to verify or validate signatures.
So I have had that discussion with Mr. Asensa, the Chief Electoral Officer for Ontario. I know he's faced a situation which, and I don't have all the facts, I want to be prudent here, with potentially fraudulent signatures. He has investigative powers, which I do not have, and I believe some action have been taken, but I don't want to speak beyond that.
Okay, so I would be curious to know if you could speak to him and get back to us on that point, because I feel strongly that there needs to be some verification process on the signatures, because Mr. Cooper's question about not having the name on the top of the form, I think you'll find a lot of these candidates in these longest ballot scenarios have this exact same list of signatures. There's probably a situation where they're given 10 or 20 pieces of paper without the names of candidates on the top of the paper. They just sign them all blankly. By the time they get into the hands of the returning officer, they have names on them. So from your perspective, they're legitimate. But I would suggest that having identical signatures across the board raises enough red flags for you to investigate, because we're not, we wouldn't be having this discussion if it wasn't for the longest ballot situation, when you're just having a normal situation where people are signing candidates' forms. That happens all the time. So I'm asking that you consider that, take some steps that are proactive on that. My next question, however, is relating to poll clerks and the district returning officer, because in my years of experience, when you go to vote, you check in with one person, they cross your name off a list, and the person beside them then hands you your ballot. In this most recent election, you reduced those two jobs into one, which, with the massive increase in interest in early voting, created long lineups. Are you considering going back to the two-person system?
So we do offer the flexibility to returning officers based on the situation that they face. In some cases, I would suggest that the lineups would have been longer had we had the two poll workers, because we would have had half of the tables being served. So it is a bit more stress on the poll workers to do all the tasks alone, but it did allow us to open up more desks, more tables to serve more electors during the advance poll. So there's a balance there to be had depending on the circumstances.
So it's the same number of people, just a different number of tables. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. And my view is that you can serve more electors in this way.
I would think the lineups would might lead to the opposite conclusion. Okay, my last point, quick, because I know I'm running out of time. Redistribution caused a bit of an anomaly too, because with the increased interest in early voting, people can go and write in the name of a candidate before the final list is provided. So I had a situation, and many people did, where you go in, you'll knock on a door, and they'll say, "Oh, I voted, but I voted for the guy that used to be the MP here. I didn't know you were the new candidate." And there's no remedy for that. So in a world where people are winning elections by 1 vote or 10 votes or 16 votes, these things matter because people had an intention of voting for one candidate, but they got the name wrong because of redistribution and they weren't aware of it. Is this something that can be remedied? You've got 10 years to do it, but is this something that you can look into and try to fix?
So I suppose the only remedy to that would be to allow voters to cast their vote by identifying the party name as opposed to the candidate. It's something that I considered in a previous recommendations report. I understand that it is far from unanimous, and I can understand why. It's not. There's no clear good or bad answer in that regard, but some jurisdictions like British Columbia do allow that, and it does allow people to cast their special ballot sooner, and it does, in that manner, reduce the number of late ballots, and that's the spirit under which I made that recommendation. Of course, it also reduces the number of spoiled ballot, as in your example.
Thank you. Do I have time left, Mr. Chair?
No, thank you. You're well over. But thank you. They were very good questions, as they all have been. Madame Normandin, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup. Je comprends qu'il y a un
Thank
des
you very much. I understand that one of the issues that prevent the sending of the voter information card is identifies a few factors. But without replacing these cards, could something be sent very early in the election? We already have the voters list, and you even have in some cases, the identity of the returning officer with relevant information saying if you haven't received your voter identification card by a certain date, please call your an office to get information on where it is. Maybe a QR code that could say bring you to the site of the chief electoral officer. Can you have a digital message, but as well a card that gets sent very early to the elector, the voter? That's not just considered, it exists. We send to each household a document saying, if you live here and you're a voter and you have not received your voter information card, as you suggested, please call or go online, because all of the information is available online. The voter information card had some additional advantages. It's a reminder that people often post on their fridge door, and it's also an element that can be a proof of address with another identity card for voters who don't have a driver's license or bills in their name. But all of that information is available, and we do campaigns, and we mail different households so people can check. And that's how some people, it's not because they're delayed, but they're not registered at the right address and they've moved, and that makes them to undertake action to change that. So that card, is it identified in the elector's name? In the voter's name? Yes, it is. The voter information card. Yes. Not the pamphlet that's sent to each address. And does the use of a QR code or something else is something that can be considered in the future, which would bring you to the Chief Electoral Officer website that will have the identification that would lead you to the BVA, BVO. But for QR codes, we have that in many communication products, so I'd be surprised if it wouldn't be in this one as well. Thank you.
So in your report, you highlight some initiatives that have were designed to increase voter participation, and probably were successful in doing that. Advanced polling, for example, voting by mail, special ballots, voting on campus, and 44% of electors voted ahead of time before voting day, which is a very big increase and shows enhanced voter participation. I would agree with that. But at least 56% of people voting on voting day do you feel that enough attention was had to making it convenient for voters on voting day? And I asked that question in the context of what happened in another neighboring riding, Cloverdale-Langley City, where 90 to 100 polls were all in one location. A big public building, very convenient for Elections Canada to be able to do that, but maybe not so convenient for voters, some of who had to drive further than they were accustomed to driving, and in a heavy traffic zone.
Yeah, it's an important question. I'm always very attentive to the issue of proximity. For many voters, it's critical. And we have not, as we've seen over the last 25 years, voters migrate from ordinary poll to advanced polls. We have not reduced correspondingly the number of polling divisions at ordinary polls. So there are fewer voters today, way fewer, close to half, and I'll let Mr. Roussel correct me here, but way fewer voters today per polling division than there were in the past. Now, this may or may not translate to more polling sites, because if you have a mega poll with 10 or 15 tables, then this may or may not, depending on the riding. If it's a suburban area with the local schools, you can easily have 10 tables and they're all neighboring. But there are circumstances where a large poll creates proximity problems. And so that is something that returning officers are well aware of, and they do strive to make the poll sites as accessible as possible. But as I said, the capacity to secure polling locations is increasingly difficult, and that's in some
even with
cases.
Large numbers of public schools. I mean, I'm talking about a fairly urbanized riding.
Yes.
And there will be elementary and high schools all over the place.
Yes.
Why not use those more?
We would love to use all the schools. That would be fantastic. My provincial counterparts in most provinces have a statutory right of access to schools. In Ontario, they don't even pay for the schools. That's not what I'm asking for. But they have that right, I don't. And it's education being provincial jurisdictions. We've seen a decline in the percentage of sites that are schools over the years. It went even lower during the pandemic and has gone back up. We're now at 22%, but it was significantly higher in the past. Schools are very convenient proximity places for electors. Unfortunately, parents are increasingly concerned about security, or increasingly concerned about activities of their children that are planned at the school for the weekend. So that puts principals in a difficult situation, and in some cases they simply do not wish to have polls at the schools.
A follow-up question on voter participation. In the report, you make the point that it improved substantially in this recent election, up to 69% voter participation, the highest, as you note, since 1993. But I did a quick research into voter turnout throughout Canadian history, and in 1958, the Diefenbaker landslide was 75%. And it stayed above 70% for a long time. And then it started to slip down, and now it's been a while since it's been above 70%. So I'm not usually a glass half empty person, but 69% means that 31% didn't vote. That's 9.8 million people. So what could be? So first of all, do you have that broken down into demographics, like who is voting and who is not voting? Is it older people not voting, younger people not voting?
We'll have that information later on. We do not have it at this time, but it will be compiled. Some demographics, for example, are not as accurate. For example, ethno-linguistic communities, we don't have that data. Age, we do, right? So certainly we'll have more information on that. It is important to remind everyone that our mandate does not include promoting participation. That's the role of other players, including yourselves and your competitors. Our role is to make sure that services are available and that information is there for electors to exercise their right if they so wish to do. Now, of course, we're always happy to see high participation rate, but that's not something that we have a mandate to promote. We have to make sure that we can provide the services. And we saw in this election with a high turnout, and a migration to advanced polls, the implication that this has for us. So when I speak of the turnout in my report and in my remarks, I'm looking at it largely from the angle of, can we meet that service demand? And as it shifts in time during the period, what are the implications for us to meet that mandate of offering services to Canadians?
Al-Assad, please.
I will be sharing my time with my colleague and good friend, Ms. O'Rourke.
Okay.
So.
I won't cut you off at the halfway mark. I'll try to give you a signal, but that's up to you to sort out.
That's perfectly fine. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll get right into it. It's no secret I'm a big proponent of open banking. I'm quite interested in the cryptocurrency space. I promise there's a point to this. It's also no secret that I'm a big proponent of government and electoral transparency. We all know that Canada's political financing regime is strong. We know there's room for improvement. Could you share your thoughts on whether we should ban political entities and third parties from accepting crypto money orders and prepaid payment products? And if so, why? What challenges need to be addressed to strengthen our political financing regime?
The problem, Mr. Chair, with those instruments is they do not provide transparency as to the original source of the contributor. And that's a key principle of our system, that we know where the money comes from. There's no, in my view, valid reason to use a prepaid instrument, a prepaid credit card, to provide money to a candidate or a political party. These tools may have a very valid purpose otherwise in our economy, but in terms of financing parties and candidates, I do not believe that they are appropriate.
Fantastic. Given that was a very quick response, I will take the time to ask my second question. It goes back to my heritage interest, and I know that Mr. Lewis is also quite interested in this one. Could you expand on the process of sharing information with local journalists and media outlets? What does that look like on the ground and on a day-by-day basis?
So if I had my media relations person, that she would provide a much greater detail to that. But we do have regional media advisors during the election that are in contact with all the news outlets and radio stations in the different communities. And so they are able to respond and support to that. Of course, we provide prepackaged pieces of information to help them and help those media outlets share the information about the voting process.
Appreciate it.
Merci, mon ami. Through you, Chair Biddle. In the November 2024 Elections Canada report, Protecting Against Threats to the Electoral Process, you recommended that the Canada Elections Act need to more clearly prohibit third parties from using property or services from foreign entities for regulated activities. Could you explain what that means and what the intent is behind your recommendation?
So I made a number of recommendations regarding to the funding of third parties, including the fact that entities that receive more than 10% of their funds from contributions should have distinct bank accounts to provide money. So that was one aspect that was included in Bill C-65. I did recommend also that we clarify rules against non-monetary contributions. So the providing of a service or a good to a third party by a foreign entity, so as not to just capture monetary contributions, but also non-monetary contributions.
So I have a municipal background, and in every cycle for a municipality, we look at voting methods. And in Ontario, in the last election, a number of municipalities went to online voting. So I just want to ask the question. So I believe that paper ballots are the safest method currently, especially when it comes to the need for a recount. But I'm just wondering if you could tell us and Canadians, what is the state of research on alternate electoral methods, whether that is online, whether it's the use of tabulators, which are not connected to the internet clearly. So what other models are you looking at? And also, if and when there are any recommendations, do you come back with costed recommendations for that?
So there is not a unique way of voting that is the best way of voting. It depends on the jurisdiction, on the circumstances, whether it's a school board election in a remote area where online voting may make a lot of sense given the low risks, in that area and the challenges that they face. But at a national level, I'm a firm believer that we should not move to online voting. I believe that the paper ballot is critical not only to the integrity but the trust of Canadians in the integrity of the process. So Canadians need to feel confident about their election, and I do not see that confidence at the federal level for online or electronic modes of voting. Now, that's a very different proposition than tabulation. Tabulation can be effective, it can be secure, it can be audited, it can be replicated. It involves the use of a paper ballot that is scanned, but it does not destroy the paper ballot. So there are many good uses of tabulation, and many provincial jurisdictions use tabulation. We do not, and I'm not looking at that for the moment. I have no plans to move towards tabulation, but that is something which could be considered. The geography that we have puts limitations on the distribution and the value proposition of sending tabulators. So even jurisdictions that use tabulation, Ontario is one, only use it in urban and suburban areas. They would not send in a remote area a tabulator. There's no business case for that. And in urban centers, they would not use a tabulator in a condo building with a single pole, where that just doesn't make any sense from a monetary point of view. So even when you go to tabulation, wall-to-wall all tabulation is not something that exists in most jurisdictions. I'm not sure I remembered the last question that you had.
In any event, time is up. I'd like to thank the witnesses. We are adjourned.